Dr. Alex, thank you very much for joining me for this session. I'm honored to have you to be on my guest. And I watched some of your video. I am very impressed to the work you have been doing for last couple of years, and especially in the field like language learning and in social psychology, the interdiscipline into linguistic science and social psychology. And also recently, I noticed you do a lot of technology stuff like ChatGPT, like how to use that to practice different aspects of the language learning, which is very interesting. I also use, so I want to learn that from you as well. So first, Dr. Alex, you can do an introduction about yourself.
With pleasure. So thanks for having me. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to talk to you today about language learning. So yes, with pleasure. I introduce myself. So I'm Dr. Alex. I'm a social psychologist and I'm the founder of this YouTube channel, Learn Languages Dr. Alex. And also I'm the author of the Everyday Nano Method. And the Everyday Nano Method is basically it's basically my learning that I had over the last 40 years in different domains, and then especially in social psychology, how to have people realize that it is the way in which we study languages that makes such a great difference. And that is why I'm so happy to speak to you, because you have also this conviction about the way in which we choose the study techniques can actually have us overcome procrastination, overcome overwhelm, overcome also the fear of speaking. And then when we realize that we just have to switch around the methods of language learning, we start to realize, oh my God, it's so much fun and it can enrich our life. So the Everyday Nano Method I wrote is like a kind of, I was so happy to do that actually, because I'm now sharing it with the world what I learned in the last 40 years. And I realized from the feedback, also from your kind feedback, that it is something that really makes sense and that it brings added value to people's lives. Because most people, I give language courses as well, and they come to me in the course and say, oh, but I have been studying this language now for the last X years and I still can't speak. How do you do that? How do you stay so positive? And this is all what it's about. It's kind of taking people the fear, lifting them out of procrastination, lifting them out of that overwhelm. Because when you start a language, you feel overwhelmed, right? You feel, oh my God, I will never learn that. And that shouldn't be like that.
Exactly.
So, that was actually what I do now. But do you want me also to say what my background is in terms of what I worked in?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I think it's very interesting. You have been a journey like English, like French, like Spanish, like I like to hear a little bit about like briefly what the journey looked like. I remember like the time getting shorter and shorter, like 10 years, like 5 years, like 3 years, that kind of thing. Yeah, very good.
And that one we have in common as well, I assume, because so my mother tongue, I was born in Germany. Then with 10 years, I was, of course, in the schooling system. I was introduced to my first foreign language, which was English. And I learned in the traditional way, and that took 10 years, because the traditional way in Germany was to train pupils, first of all, to read, to translate, to analyze the grammar, to be good and exact with the grammar. But the focus was less on the speaking because the objective was different. And I always say every method has its reason in the given context. So it's probably right for a pupil system and for teaching lots of pupils how to be good in grammar. But I realized for my aim to actually then finally be able to speak when I was an adult, it didn't serve me, because I was not able to speak. So when I was 21, I realized, and then I needed it for work. I was like, oh my God, I can't even say this sentence, and I have studied it for 10 years. So I was able to cite the grammar rule, but I was not able to say an easy sentence. So that actually made me alert already at that time. Then later, but in my 30s, for professional reasons, I moved to France. And I forgot to say also, I moved for professional reasons. And for professional reasons, I moved around a lot because I worked in different Fortune 500. I worked as a management consultant. So I saw different language contexts. So I was always exposed to different languages, and I was like, oh God, that's so fascinating. And it always fascinated me to see how the way of thinking influenced also how people work together.
Exactly.
So then when I was then moving to France, I was like, okay, I never was exposed to French in school, but let me learn this. And I learned French in a completely different way. I didn't have courses. I learned in the exact opposite way, which was immersion and being forced like a little child. Okay, you're in a new context where you don't understand anything. Now start. So I remember when I first came to France, I was like, okay, how do I say hello? This is how it started. And I was completely like a child, like in immersion. I worked in English, but in parallel, I was being immersed. And with this technique, then later, I have to say later, after 1.5 years, I started a course in parallel to learn the system. But it altogether to become fluent, it only took me 3 years. So I started to say that can't be the case. Why did it take so long for English, and then for French it was like 3 years? Okay.
Yeah.
Then came the Spanish experience. I started at around 40. And Spanish, I then brought together the best parts of my previous experience. So I was starting this thing of, okay, first thing, and that's also the central element of the everyday nano technique, is having an intention to say something in the real life. And that was part of my French experience as well. Only if I wanted to communicate something, then it really stuck with me. So if I needed it for a real experience in my work, in my everyday life, then I was able to memorize really quickly. So the intention and the real interaction with people, I realized that was the central part. And then also this constant exposure to the language, constant. And then the third one I realized with the Spanish was to fight the overwhelm syndrome. Okay, constant, but in small doses. So it's better to have these, and you know that from the videos I do, to have small channeled 5 minutes per day than putting yourself in a 3-hour podcast and then again feeling overwhelmed, because after 3 hours you feel exhausted. I don't know what your experience is, but for me also, even if I listen to a podcast, as soon as overwhelm kicks in, I switch it off and I move on to something else.
Yeah.
Do you have that as well, or how do you deal with
so I think
podcasts or
everyone
listening?
everyone is different. I do, but my journey is similar to yours. I learned English like totally for school purpose. Study, remember vocabulary, study grammar for the test, and almost never speak. Also listen a little. So when I come to United States at 25, I don't really understand what's going on. I cannot communicate. It's like I never learn English. Yeah, I don't know what English I have been learning. So so that's a similar experience.
Had the same experience.
Yeah, and my Spanish journey is similar to kind of similar, but I didn't really live in a Spanish speaking country. I live in the US, so I don't really have a environment to practice. But
I have the same, by the way. I never lived as well. Sorry to interrupt, but I also never lived in a Spanish-speaking country. So I realized if I'm only 2 years in Spanish, so that's the proof. You don't have to move to another country.
Exactly, that proves you don't really need to live in a country to learn the language of that country. That's exactly your experience. My experience exactly, demonstrate that. If you have a framework, a method, fit your lifestyle, fit your your capability of learning, I think you can learn. And also your experience indicate once you once you have some experience learning language on your own, the next one is easier. Next one much easier and easier, because it's like a repeat the same good practice
the
for learning.
Exactly. And I think you said just now, you said two keywords, key sentences, sorry. One is everyone is different and you need to figure out your personal system of learning or your method. And that can be done with principles. Like I'm very much, how do you say that? I believe in principles, but not in dogmatism. Like, I don't believe that there's one unique method that everyone makes
No.
us. That doesn't exist because, as you said, everyone is different. You need to adapt it to your personal life. But if you
Right.
apply certain principles that make sense for the brain to not be overwhelmed and also for social interaction to not feel fear, then you start to feel liberated because you don't have this pressure of, oh my God, I need to perform, like for an exam, remember at school, oh my God, I need to be perfect. No.
Right. Exactly.
And that's the social psychological part that comes in. And that is, I think, what we can talk about on YouTube so nicely or on other social platforms, because most people have still this idea of the schooling system in their mind. And
Yeah.
as soon as fear, procrastination, or overwhelm sets in,
Yeah.
you start to feel it's something totally not fun, totally against
Yeah.
life, you know?
You have a lot of anxiety, about your performance, everything. But that brings my next question. In your video, you mentioned quite a bit social psychology have impact on the language learning, especially the adult. So first,
Yes.
I think a lot of people they don't really know what is the social psychology. Maybe you can give us a little bit background. What is it? Why is it important to apply some of the principle, in language learning?
Thank you very much. That is such an important question. And thank you for giving me the chance to say that. I was myself, when I started studying social psychology, I was so amazed because I came across a scientific field that brings together two things out of our life. One thing is how the individual works, how our mind works, how our body works, and it brings it in context with how we function in the social interaction. So the nice thing that social psychology adds to language learning is actually you always look at how your brain and mind functions in a social interaction, in communication. So you never can tell, you can never say in learning that everything is down to your individual motivation or talent only, because social psychology forces you to say as well, let's have a look at the system you're in. Because if we say, for example, to somebody who is not making progress in language learning, oh, this might be your motivation, or oh, this might be your talent, or this might be your mindset only, then we're limiting reality to an individual that is completely isolated from a social context, and that would be reductionist. Because we are always in a context. And if you put me now out of this context where I'm currently into a totally different social context, I would probably behave differently and also learn different and think different, because human beings adapt to social context. And also we are learning for a social context. So social psychology always looks at both, at the social interaction, the social dynamic that is going on through culture, stereotypes, prejudice, through fear. But fear not as an individual thing, but fear in terms of which dynamic are we in. For example, if I talk to somebody who is in a different hierarchy, different authority, or different cultural, I don't know, sphere that is relevant to my context, I might completely interact, speak, think differently to someone I have a neutral relationship with.
Exactly.
And so fear is, in social psychology, fear would be analyzed from two perspectives. For example, you would look at fear, okay, classically, like in psychology, they would analyze fear in terms of your childhood memories, in terms of how your body at the moment, are you maybe in a fearful state because you have not eaten properly, or you have chemical things going on. That's the individual fear. But fear can also be social, because you have been trained in this kind of context. There is an authority or power relationship, so I have to be fearful.
Yeah.
So that's two dimensions that are so useful, because sometimes in our society, I mean, the cultures that I have come across, they always tend to blame immediately the individual. So like in the schooling system, they tend to say, okay, if this pupil is not having good grades, it must be the pupil not studying enough. It must be the pupil not being motivated. And that's one conclusion that might be even right, but we need to always look at in which context has this person been, which people has he or she been surrounded with, and which techniques of study have been imposed on him that maybe don't even correspond to the person and to the creativity or the way of thinking of the person. So
Exactly.
this interrelationship is so useful when you, as an adult, then watch your own learning preferences, because it always has you analyze in 2 dimensions, and you start to also blame yourself less, if you know what I mean. Like, for
Yeah.
example, if I don't advance in my current Italian studies, I tend to say, okay, it might be that I have not been motivated, but it might simply be that this week I charged my calendar too much. So it's the system of time management that might be the reason, and not my motivation.
Yes.
You
You
know?
overwhelm a little bit. Yeah. Sometimes. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the system. So it's always 2. It's the individual and the systematic. And this is what social psychology brought to my life. And this is what I'm passionate about sharing, because we have this view of psychology, individual psychology. Always we analyze the individual, but then we tend to forget there's also a system we are in. And that, I mean, look at big organizations. You perform completely different in a different company that you're working in. Why? Because you change the context and the thinking structures of that company, the prevailing culture of that company, and so on and so forth.
Exactly. I remember you mentioned a word very interesting. I still remember you mentioned if you during your learning process, the good feeling is very important.
Yes. That one as well,
Yeah.
the emotions. We tend to forget about the emotions, and that is with
Yeah.
any learning, right? If we
Yeah.
don't feel good, the brain will say, okay, this in the past experience, we didn't feel good about that, so let's avoid. And then
Yeah.
the brain will signal to yourself, oh, procrastinate, it's better, it's not good.
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
you didn't feel fun.
And Crescent, comprehensive input. There are 5 hypotheses. One of those is that you only can learn when you're in a relaxed mode, because
Yes,
learning
exactly.
is a subconscious activity.
Yes,
Only you are in a relaxed mode, your brain works properly. It's working
yes,
100% on what you are learning or consuming.
exactly.
But if you have
Exactly.
anxiety, your whole body is preoccupied by that, like a negative emotion, and you have no room in your brain, focus on anything you're studying or learning. Yeah.
Exactly. And there will be no creativity, there will be no learning, there will just be, okay, do I do fight or flight? Because I'm
Yeah.
fearful.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
you explained it so nicely. It's this kind of, the brain switches on, okay, I'm in defensive mode now because I'm fearful.
Yeah.
I need to protect. And that's complete
Yeah.
different mode. Protection is
Yeah.
good as well for difficult situations in life.
Yeah.
But for learning a language, it's not the right
Yeah.
state, right?
It's actually there is
Exactly.
I like to add a little bit culture aspect of the Chinese culture. Most of the Chinese students, like in school age or even adult, the culture is like they're afraid of making mistake. That's why they always postpone their practice of the speaking practice during the learning. That's why most of the Chinese students, they work so hard with the English, but they can read, they can write, they can do a lot of things, but they cannot speak. They just afraid of making mistake. Learn language mistake is a good thing. I mean, you learn from mistake. That's how
Exactly.
you improve. But that culture aspect, same thing with Japanese, like Asian culture, they all have this mindset, how other people look at me, if I make some mistake or pronunciation, that kind of thing.
Yes.
It's a big problem for this community.
And you said it so well. It's a cultural thing, because how the culture invented, sorry, but it's the same in the culture I grew up in. It's a name that we invented, a label for something that should be avoided in that culture. So we call it error. But error doesn't apply to creativity, to learning. It's nothing that helps for creativity and learning. It helps for mathematical formulas, for physics, for engineering. There is right and wrong,
Exactly.
because otherwise the machine won't work, right?
Yeah.
But like for learning, creativity, feeling relaxed, having good experiences, this label error doesn't help us, because we start to ourselves behave like machines. Like, I need to be
Exactly.
right or wrong. And it doesn't feature that aspect of creativity at all.
Yeah.
And I had a
Yeah.
similar experience when growing up. I was so afraid of making an error and being judged. And I remember
Yeah.
that feeling. It was like, oh my God, I'd rather study a bit more before I say something. And that
Yeah.
completely blocks.
Yeah, especially in the school system, because everything is test driven. The test is based on how many answer is correct, how many answers
Yes.
wrong. So it's that's the only motivation. People want to get a good grade. That's why they all afraid of making mistake.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's one theory in social psychology that is nicely explaining that phenomenon. If a culture constructs socially the idea of a good pupil around errors and not errors, it is it's called social identity theory. That was 1960s or 70s.
Sure.
And this social identity theory says our identity and self-worth is constructed socially around what the culture values as good and bad. So if we say a good pupil is constructed around the notion of not having many errors in the exam, of course, I will not speak because then I have less errors. And so I'm being valued culturally as a good pupil. And this is how social identity is constructed for children. And that is what, for me, this social identity theory later helped me to realize we need to reconstruct adult learning around a different identity. An identity of I'm being a learner my whole life. And being a learner my whole life means and we need to label that different. Not making errors is not applicable. It's kind of, I'm actually calling them now, it's just experiences, right?
Exactly.
Because it's about many experiences and we learn constantly. This is what life is about, life experiences, right?
Exactly. It's like how the baby learn their mother tongue.
Yeah.
They make a lot of mistakes. They make probably 100
Exactly.
mistakes before they say the correct word, or correct
Exactly.
correct
And
sound.
the children, what you said before applies so much to the children learning because they are relaxed the whole time. They are not fearful.
Yeah, they don't
feel
care. They don't
safe.
care.
They are psychologically safe and they
Yeah.
feel, I just said this, now I say this, and they don't even label this as mistakes because they don't know mistakes.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's
And
perfect.
sometimes they purposely they make some sound, strange sound. They feel silly. They like it. They like practice. They think that's a good thing. That's a funny thing. Say something silly.
Exactly.
But for
And this
adults,
is,
we are more tough on ourselves. You have to be perfect.
absolutely.
Everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what we have in common. Your book mentioned this so centrally, and this is, the center of my approach as well. That in the Everyday Nano method, I say basically everything starts with mindset, and mindset is how you set your mind to language learning. So, as you said, think like a child. Okay, I will have this experience. I will laugh a lot. I will have good social interactions. We will have fun together. If you set your mind like that, you come into a complete new universe,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. My experience with my Spanish, I use a lot of language exchange. Some of my partner, we have been friends for like over 3 years. So every conversation is very relaxed. I'm never afraid of making any mistake. They don't correct my mistake, but I realize my mistake later. I will correct myself.
Yeah.
But I'm never afraid of say something bad or something wrong. Something
Exactly.
incorrect. So that helped me a lot.
What can happen?
Yeah. So also in your video you use Chat GPT. Chat GPT is also a good companion for learning because you're not afraid of making mistakes in front of a machine like a AI, right? So that's also a good thing. It's a good approach to for some of the introvert people have difficult talk to real people. They definitely right now they can use technology to practice a lot of things. Yeah.
And I find also even ChatGPT or any other artificial intelligence, there are so many now, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages, but pick one, just try it out and see how you're going. Because as you said, I used to be really, introvert, extrovert always are things that don't help because in some situations I'm introvert, in some situations I'm extrovert. But if you have that, like you just described, you'd rather not speak. So ChatGPT is perfect because you just start to speak. And then when you talk to a real human being, you're like, okay, yeah, it's the same. Actually, it doesn't matter. If I make a mistake, we have a laugh and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Also, in your video, I noticed you talk a lot about like a routine, like a 5 minutes routine every day. Like you also have some like a template. Maybe you can introduce a little bit, your perspective. Why it's important to have like consistent routine like on daily basis? It doesn't matter how long. I mean, 5 minutes can work, 10 minutes can work, right? Depending on your schedule.
Yes, thank you very much for that excellent question. It's very important to have a very self-honest routine with yourself. So first of all, as you said earlier, everyone is different. So there's no one routine that will work for everyone. The principles I apply to myself to stay self-honest and self-aware is that I have three things. One is to always have short exposure, short bits and pieces, but regular. As I said before, constant immersion for me doesn't mean that the whole day in the background I will listen to a podcast. It doesn't work.
Sure.
For me, it works to have this hyper fragmentation of time. So 5 minutes per day, but it can be different things. So I need to have one, maybe today, for example, in the morning, I was walking my dog and I had 5 minutes per day listening to Italian phrases that I would use in everyday life. And then stop because my dog gave me the signal that this is too much now. So
enough, that's enough.
Yeah. So 5 minutes per day, the hyperfragmentation. Then this second thing is this being self-aware when you have, for example, in your everyday routine, when you have situations that you really have intention to say something, then you can use that for language learning. Like I always try to focus on things that are high frequency and that make sense to my life.
Sure.
These are very important for me because why? Because if I learn in passive study for 5 minutes things that don't apply to my life, I will forget them immediately.
Yeah.
So it needs to have relevance. For example, I give you an example. I had a client recently that could not find my workplace, and we were on the phone and I was directing him to find my place. And so I was like, okay, I gave directions in French. How would I give the same directions in Italian? Because this really happened. So this is also from social psychology. It is using a real life experience that creates relevance in your brain to actually have memory related to it, because your brain then says, it's important for your life to give directions to a client. So therefore it's good to know it also in Italian.
Exactly.
So I do that. That's the second principle. And the third principle is to also be very self-compassionate. If I am tired because we are having a heat wave at the moment and I feel very tired, also to say, okay, today's 5 minutes is just going to listen to an extract of something that was relevant to me yesterday and then stop,
Sure.
To be self-compassionate, not to do too much as well.
Sure. Yeah.
And this is kind of also from social psychology, because we tend to, discipline is the highest form for me of self-respect. Discipline is good because we respect ourselves, but also in the discipline needs to be an element to say, okay, if I feel tired, it's probably not the good moment. So let's choose a different moment,
Sure.
So let me know about your daily rhythm. What is your kind of current rhythm of learning?
Yeah, that depends on the stage of my learning. For example, at the beginning, when I began to learn Spanish, I do study some of the high frequency words, and also the basic grammar rules. Not a lot, very basic, the very useful one. For example, Spanish. One verb can have like 100 like a conjugación.
Yes.
See, you don't have to know everything. I only need to know 2 past tense, 1 present tense, and 1 future tense, because that's I use every day.
Exactly.
So instead of focusing my energy or time on something I never use, like like a substantivo. I don't really describe. It's very difficult,
you don't use
right?
it that much.
Exactly. So that's kind of my approach. So I spend it's more like active learning at like a very beginning. But once I reach to like a 3,000, 4,000 word, like active vocabulary, I start to practice a lot of listening. I listen like 30 minutes or sometimes even 1 hour weekend, using my, like a small time, like during the walk, do some chores in the house, that kind of thing. And then later I practice speaking at the very beginning. I don't really, because many people say you should wait.
Ah,
but
yes,
I don't,
that's so important.
yeah, I don't want to wait. I want to practice once I learn something useful.
Yes.
I apply immediately.
Exactly. Like,
so
for example, if you're an absolute beginner like me in Portuguese now, I started Portuguese now in in parallel to Italian because it's so similar. So I want to know just the greeting of how I say hello in Portuguese. And then I want to be fluent in just greeting a person in
Yeah.
Portuguese before I even move on to things like you just explained, like high frequency verbs. So master the pronunciation of greetings before I move on. So that's fluency at beginner's level already.
Exactly. You have A1 fluency, like A2 fluency. Yeah, fluency,
Exactly.
not like a perfect. Fluency can be,
Yeah.
you say 5 sentences perfectly. That's a fluency for those 5 sentences, right? So yes, that's also a definition like people confuse. Every time they say fluency, they thinking, you are C1 level, C2 level.
C1, yeah.
Fluency,
exactly.
Yeah, fluency can be conversational fluency, right? You can greeting people, you can talk about your daily life. You may not express, you may not give a public speech, but it doesn't have to be that way. Yeah. So
exactly. It depends which fluency we're talking about. And you just mentioned that so nicely, the A1 fluency. There's something magic that happens. I'm sure you had the same experience. The magic is once you have A1 fluency, like let's take my example of just greeting in Portuguese. So I recently met somebody who is native speaker in Portuguese, and I was like, this is my opportunity to practice. I can greet. So I was saying this bom dia. Can you correct me, please? Bom dia?
Bom dia. Bom dia.
So I tried this out, and he did the same. He corrected me, and I was like, can you teach me how to say ¿cómo estás in español? So what was it again in Portuguese?
The same. ¿Cómo estás? Pero normally they say você. It's like ¿cómo estás você?
Yeah. So this magic actually then you move on a little bit, you learn a little bit with every of these interactions. Like you just taught me earlier as well before the interview, this thing about the pronunciation of the E in Espanol changes to E, I and E. Yeah. Now we have the English vowel position. It doesn't matter. But this is the magic that happens once you have A1 fluency. You kind of have a nice way of engaging already with native speakers, and they help you to get to the next level. And it's just a nice little next step. And instead of focusing on the big mountain of C1, you just focus on, okay, maybe I'm now A1 plus fluent.
Sure. Yeah. Other thing, when I watch a video, I think one of the video you mentioned, your 10 years English learning journey is totally opposite of the 3 years French, 5 year or 3 year, 5 year, right? 3 year,
3 years in
3 year
French.
So your English learning process is like focus on grammar and the vocabulary. And your French is the focus on, from very beginning, you focus on use the language, not learn the language. Focus on your surrounding, right? Today you need to buy something. You need to practice how you buy a ticket, the train ticket. Yeah, surviving skill, exactly. So I think that's a very good approach because only the scenario relevant to you, because that's how your brain works. Your brain doesn't remember word like in an isolated form. Every word has connection to other words, right? So when you use the word, because that have a context, the context about a story or context about your life, right? That's how when you repeat with the context, and that became part of you, right? So that's how the brain works. That's how the language should work as well. Yeah.
Exactly, and you explained it so nicely because it's with the context of the social interaction and the meaning. As soon as you have meaning for your real life, your brain will just memorize so quickly because you survived last time in the post office. I was able to speak to that lady. Next time I have a similar situation, I will master it because your brain will protect you from struggling in a post office next time.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
exactly.
It's
Yeah,
brilliant. So once you have that principle of making sense to your real life, and also always thinking about the next, I call them future memories. That's so beautiful
yeah,
to always say, okay, I imagine tomorrow I need to go to the car repair center, and now if I was able to say that in my target language, what is wrong with my car? Brilliant. So let's use that example because it makes sense to my real life.
yeah. My experience, once you reach to like an intermediate level, you have more
Mhm.
option. For example, when I learn Spanish, when I travel, for example, to Mexico or like South America, I normally I do a search like how like arrange my schedule, like look for other people experience in English or in Chinese sometimes. But why when my Spanish reach level, I do every search in Spanish because you are
Very
visiting
good.
Mexico, you are visiting South America, they are speaking Spanish. The Spanish search result came up much better, much high quality because
Mhm.
it's more rich to the culture, like the food, everything. So use the language as much as possible. Once you
Yes,
reach to a
for
certain
that,
level,
exactly.
yeah, exactly.
That's a very good example because also searching for something, you have a purpose, you have this intention. So that also tells your brain this is very important and high importance thing to your real life will be memorized at lightning speed. Very good example.
Exactly. And the experience much better because the search result came up like recommendation for
And much
like a
higher
travel
quality.
agency for natives, for local
Yeah,
people. And you have
exactly.
a much richer experience, using that strategy during your vacation or during your visit, right? So
Yes, as you outlined, the quality of the recommendations are better because you don't get tourist
exactly.
recommendations.
You don't get the trap because everything is authentic. You understand the local culture. You know how
Yeah,
local
and
people. Yeah,
exactly. As you
yeah,
just said, this is so nice as well. You get every language is the entry key to the culture, and you they think like that. It's what I learned. I mean, language is so fascinating, right? Because it's like an entry. It's like the door you open, you go into
yeah,
this new way of thinking, and you
yeah.
understand if a person says something to you, you start to understand their way of thinking. That
Exactly.
is what is the fascinating and the passionate thing about language learning because you're not kind of, when I travel to a country where I don't speak the language, I always feel behind like a glass wall. I am
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
but I'm not there
yeah,
because I
yeah.
don't have access to the thinking structure.
Yeah, definitely the language have impact on your like a character, your way thinking, because
Yeah,
language is a carrier of how you think eventually.
how you
It's
think, yeah.
yeah, it's not some just a tool, to express what you need. It's when you reach to a certain level, I mean, I'm sure you have the experience that when you speak Italian or when you speak French, you think in French, you think in
Yeah,
Italian, right? You don't think in
absolutely.
English or German, right?
Yeah.
I do the same. And that way of thinking sometimes it's quite dramatic. And that open you look the world with more dimension, not just like a
Yes,
one perspective. You have a lot of other perspective. You understand
you
better
have different
when you
perspectives.
hear a news, from that country, instead of judge them from your English speaking like knowledge, you use the way thinking, you understand better why it's happening, right? You
Yes,
understand better.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
what would you say? How do you observe yourself when you are in a Spanish speaking context or in an English speaking context or Chinese speaking context? How do you observe yourself? Does your character change?
Absolutely, absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. My whole English life is a professional life. So when I speak
Mhm.
English, I feel like I always kind of gave a speech, like always
Yeah.
speaking in professional way. But when I talk to Spanish, because all my Spanish experience with a friend, with like I make a lot of friends in
You feel more
Latin
like in a
American.
friendship kind
Yeah,
of.
I'm
Yeah.
very relaxed. Like I almost sometimes like change a person. I make a lot of jokes. I never be
Yes.
professional in my Spanish
Yeah.
speaking activity. when I do Chinese, it's more like the culture, like more subtle. Like I don't say things word directly. I more like indicate something.
Yes.
So definitely, I mean, you don't do that purposely. That's part of your
No.
that's part of intuitive like reaction. You just do naturally because you are switching the language and your behaviors switch as well.
Behavior and character and exactly and habits change as well. I observe myself. I behave differently. I would say, as you said, in some cultures you would be more delicate with some certain things. You would not touch on them. In some others, you would be very direct because it's expected to be direct, and it's a politeness form to be direct. In other cultures, if you're direct, oh my God, don't do it.
Yeah, it's disaster. Sometimes.
Exactly. But what you said also is such a brilliant example for in social psychology. There's one I can look up the reference, but it's this. What always stayed with me from my studies is the ability to take the perspective of the other. That is such a life enriching thing because you start to take the perspective of the other, not only in terms of the content of what is said, but in terms of the patterns. How do you do that? Like, for example, in one language, it might be a complete different pattern of greeting and asking how the person is than in another. And so you start to completely put yourself at the place of the other culture. And that is so rich. As you said, you start to learn to switch perspectives.
Yeah, that's one of the benefit I feel I learn multiple languages. Like you feel like you live multiple life. You not only live like one life because you're living in other language life. So your lifespan is much richer because you
become it's much more weightless. It's more freeing. You feel less culturally weight. Yes. There is one who did that. One linguist. I can also give you the reference if that is of interest, maybe for the audience as well. Cultural weightlessness. Oh, I think Kaufman said this. Do you know the great polyglot Kaufman?
Oh, Steve Kaufman. Yeah.
Steve Kaufman, who is from Canada and who started at the age of 50 to learn languages and now speaks like more than 20.
20 languages. It's crazy. Yeah.
And he coined this term that really stuck with me because it's true. It's cultural weightlessness. So what does it mean? It means you realize, oh, if I feel in XYZ culture I have a problem, it might only be due to the way in which I think about it, because it might not even be a problem. And the ability to shift the perspective, okay, it is not a problem because it's only in that culture that it's labeled as a problem,
Exactly.
So it makes you weightless. It makes you become more freer about your life experience. And that is the enriching part of language study, right?
Yeah, especially a lot of culture, especially the Eastern culture, Western culture, sometimes is totally opposite. Sometimes when you have some like a bad experience, you're stuck with that feeling maybe for too long. But if you have other perspective, you can just feel released immediately because you see other perspective, the same thing.
Yes. Would you have a nice example out of your experience for how the Eastern and Western cultures are complete opposite? Like if you, for example, one of your travels, or where did you experience that? For example, in the Western culture, this is really heavy, and you go to the Eastern culture, and it's not even heavy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of examples. Some of the bigger ones, for example, in China, for example, I don't know other Asian countries. In China, when you reach to a certain age, if you don't get married or you don't have like a partner or boyfriend, girlfriend, you get tremendous social pressure from your family, from your neighbor, from your college, from pretty much everywhere. You get a lot of but this one in Latin America, even in Western country, pretty much every Western country, this is not a big deal. I mean, it's a personal choice, right? So this is huge. So in China, if you ask a person in that age, like 30, for example, it's a very sensitive question because that can trigger a lot of emotion.
Okay. If you ask, it's very important.
But it's a private question. But in the Western, it's more like a privacy. It's not that you don't really feel that like tremendous pressure when you deal with that kind of question, right?
So, very good example, yeah. So you can feel liberated of that cultural pressure by simply changing the context, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's one example. So yeah, there's a lot. I mean, almost like all the major perspective, social life, personal life, the culture is quite different from because I move around between those two cultures all the time, so I can feel.
Yes, you have that all the time, and you start. It's quite amusing, isn't it? When you
yeah,
shift
it's very
and you
interesting
think, "Oh my God, this seems to be a problem," but it's not really a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I became like an observer. Because I kind of look both sides, so it's very interesting to think about, why this way, other way. Yeah.
I have a similar one that you just reminded me of when you mentioned your brilliant example. You just reminded me of in the culture that I was raised in as a child. It is very important to be, when you introduce somebody, when you get to know a new person, one of the first questions, but in adult context, is what do you do for a living? Like, what is your profession?
Oh, wow. Very direct.
Important, and it's kind of after hello, how are you? It's the maybe third or fourth question before even how is your family, or okay, now I'm valuing and judging it, but it shouldn't be judged. It's just very important in that culture.
Yeah.
In other cultures, like many polyglots know, it's totally unimportant because it's just a profession. So you would start maybe a conversation. How are you? How is your family? How has your day been? What are you passionate about as a human being? So I'm obviously now judging it because I have preferences, but I'm not saying they're good or bad. But I realized sometimes when I meet people from this culture, they would ask me that, and I'm reminded for how important it is to them. So I would always say, okay, yes, I need to go back to their perspective, understand that, and respect it, because it's not bad. I'm just saying it's far more important to them.
But when you learn different language, you understand better why people ask the question. Like you mentioned, what do you do for a living? I mean, it's just like a casual question. It's like a part of you. Everybody. Make a living for sure, but some cultures, they are very sensitive, especially maybe there's an economic situation of the country, that can be go to different direction.
Exactly, it depends again on the context, and we need to of course respect. But what it teaches, maybe to draw the conclusion, for me, what it teaches me is exactly what we just referred to for this cultural weightlessness, or how you said it. We become observers, we become less worried about these things because we see them as, yes, it is important in that context. If we change the context, something else is more important. It depends. So we can never generalize, and it helps us also to be not be very dogmatic about things. Because I feel I have my personal experience was with dogmatism, or with saying there's only one best way of doing things. You always have friction. You have people starting arguments. You have people having misunderstandings, because if you start to become dogmatic about one way of, no, there is no one way, because it depends on life, on the context of the objective you have. You become more tolerant and more open, actually.
Exactly. More language definitely make you more open to different ideas, different personalities. Absolutely.
Our generation, we have now considerate experience. We have worked more than 30 years. It is so easy to become dogmatic because we have all that experience. And I feel it helps me at this stage of my life to say, okay, I have 30 years of experience and more, but there might be still totally different ways of doing things, even if I have real good professional experience. And maybe today this makes sense, and tomorrow there's something else. So this is the openness.
Look the world right now. I mean, they change every day, right?
Exactly.
The politics, the everything. It's the
constant
speed.
Change.
The speed of changing, not just like the politics. I mean, it's including technology. Look at the ChatGPT in 3 years.
It's so
how
quick.
Much progress every release is a huge surprise, always beyond your expectation. From the text, to the voice, to the video. Next stage, I don't know what's next. It's unimaginable. It's a
very good point. And also it helps us to not become cynical or not become negative and say, oh, back in the day, it worked like this, and now the young people, you have often people then going, oh, this is better than that, and it helps you to not kind of judge so easily. In social psychology also there's this theory of prejudice. How can stereotypes and prejudice evolve, or how can they emerge? And languages help us to become more self-aware that actually it's just my way of thinking. So I need to always stay humble and observe, as you said before. So it helps us with that, and with age, not to become cynical or ironic or say in the old days everything was better. No.
Normally, when people get older, they like to judge people, because they think they have the best life experience, but they don't realize the world also changing.
Exactly. In that time, it was the best possible way. Like, remember in the 80s, 90s, when we started our professional careers, we had a one best way, because at that time things were done like that. But that was fit for that context. And now, no, you don't do things like that.
Totally. Yeah. Learning language is totally different right now. Last question, because you have a lot of experience, study language. Also, you work with your students, or like adult to teach them certain things. So in your opinion, from your observation, the adult learning language at this stage, the modern age, what's a common mistake they made during their learning?
Very good question. Yes, the common mistake is thinking, actually, and that leads on nicely to what we just said, to think that there is one best way. So they always come to me with the question, yeah, but how is it done now? How is it done? And I'm like, I can only give you the principles, but how is it done? You need to find out your perfect study routine. This is why I do in my coaching sessions as well. I first of all elaborate with them. I listen to them. How is their life rhythm? What would fit best into their life, and then I give the principles so that they don't go into overwhelm, that they don't go into procrastination, and that they don't feel fear. So it's about establishing this routine that gives them psychological safety, and to also tell them that they can be relaxed. I like to use your word, relaxed, about losing this idea of this. I would say this is the most frequent mistake, of thinking that there's one best way or one best book. There is no one best book. I mean, there are very good books, but then you need to choose your 3 favorite books and then go with them. I mean, there is, if I have my best book in the world, it would not be the best book for you, because, it depends on the person, it depends on the context. So the principle-based learning, this is what I focus on with them, to say, okay, here are the principles to avoid that you block yourself, but the rest is really, it depends on your life. And I help them with that. And once they realize that, and once they realize that there are no mistakes to be made in language learning, everything gets more relaxed, as you said before. And once you are in that state of having fun, of being relaxed, and of thinking, this is part of my life experience, then it starts to flow.
Sure, absolutely. I agree. I totally agree. Yeah, you have to resolve the cloud in your mindset. If you don't have a correct mindset, the harder you work, the more problem you have, because you are in the stress situation. You work
stress, exactly. We need to avoid that.
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree. So my experience is saying I don't take like a language test. I learn purely for fun, for chatting with, making friends, talking to friends, that kind of thing. And
that
also
is the intention and the objective, exactly. And once you know that, you automatically feel relaxed. Exactly.
Enjoy the process. It's more important than the result. If you really, and ironically, if you enjoy the process, the result comes quicker and better.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that. Like, now I learned so many things from you as well. Look, we use technology to have a fascinating interview across many kilometers, across different continents here. And we use a language that is not our native language to exchange ideas on how to help having a joyful process. Isn't that great? That's also an outcome of language learning.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, English is not your native language. I mean, English is not my. I mean, we can exchange ideas. Talk about everything.
This
That's
is
really,
the
really
magic
wonderful.
of it,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
And remember back in the, well, old days now, let's forget about that expression, but
I think we have
remember
very
when,
similar. We have very similar, similar age, similar experience
yeah,
with the
exactly.
the technology, the learning, the method, everything. Yeah, the
Because we
theory.
started our professional lives, remember, that was just before internet started, right? I mean, for me, I remember my first office I integrated was still without any computers.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. Yeah, same.
Yeah,
I graduated from 1990. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and me 94,
No
exactly.
internet. My English journey, no
Nothing.
internet. I don't even have an English, like an original English book. The book is a Chinese English book. It's a
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, cassette.
So,
Cassette is my listening comprehension material.
yes, with the cassette. Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so unimaginable. Now, I just wanted to use this example to say, look, some years ago, I mean, it seems to me like yesterday, this whole experience we're having now wouldn't have been possible. Now, if we had been dogmatic about that it's better to use cassettes and to write on a piece of paper, we wouldn't be able to do that, right?
Yeah. The technology totally changed the game. Yeah, and right now learning language is it's so there's no excuse. Anyone say I cannot learn language. I don't believe that.
Yeah.
There. I mean, you can easily get like a talk to person, native person, people. You can travel. I mean, you can just there are endless like a very good listening material. Just click away. It's right there. Yeah. So there's no excuse. Only excuse.
And this,
You don't want to learn.
This is the
That's the only
actual
thing
motivation for anyone
Yeah.
who might be listening to us, who says, yeah, but I don't have this talent. No, the whole of this interview actually is can be summarized in this, that it's not down to talent or motivation, as you just summarized. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I think I get all my questions.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for the excellent questions. It was a brilliant conversation, really.
Thank you for accepting this interview. I do learn a lot. I learned something new this session. Absolutely.
Me too, definitely. That was brilliant. Thank you so much.